The question now is, what do we want to do with that value? What's the goal now? And the answer is, well, we want to make sure that we store it somewhere so that when the form is submitted, we can use that value. Because of course we want to gather all values for all inputs and then combine them into an object when the form overall is submitted. And one way of storing that value and making sure that it survives, even if that function would be re-executed for whatever reason, so this component function, I mean, to make sure that we store the value and that it survives if that function would be re-executed and the component would be re-evaluated, we can again use state. So we can import the useState hook from React here and basically just call it here at the beginning of the expense form function and set the state for this input here, so to say. And initially that's an empty string because initially when this component is rendered for the first time, nothing was entered. But then we can again use destructuring to get our two elements, which is the currently entered title, maybe we name it entered title, and a function for updating the state, which following the convention should be named set entered title. And here, when we react to this event where the user enters something, we can just call set entered title and pass event target value, so the currently entered value, as a parameter, as an argument to set entered title. And therefore this will be stored in our state. Now here I'm not really doing it to update this component, though the component will update. That will always happen when you update the state, but I'm doing it to ensure that we're storing this in some variable which is kind of detached from the life cycle of this component function, so that no matter how often this component function might execute again, this state is stored and survives. There would be other ways of solving this as well, but that works just fine. And it has another advantage because we'll need that state for updating and for re-rendering that component later anyways. But for the moment, we just use it to save the value. Now we can do the same for the other two inputs, and of course definitely try this on your own as well. Pause the video and make sure you listen to these change events for the other inputs as well, and that you also store state for those changes. So here's your chance to pause the video. Thereafter, we'll implement this together. So, did you add that? Let's now do it together. And I'll start by adding a new function, and that will be the amount change handler. And the logic is basically the same as before. I want to make sure that this function gets triggered whenever the amount changes. So on the amount input, we can add a onChange prop and point at the amount change handler just like that. And before I add any code in there, I will already add the third function for my date change handler, like this, and that should be triggered whenever the date changed. So here I also listen to onChange and point at the date change handler. So now all these inputs are wired up, but of course at the moment nothing is happening here. Now I also of course want to store state for changes made here, and that brings up one important question. Maybe a problem you also encountered. How can you manage more than one state? It is something we haven't learned up to this point. But it turns out that it is rather simple. You can call useState more than once. Maybe you tried that, and if you did, good job, because you can do that. You can have multiple state slices or state pieces per component. And all these states inside of one and the same component will then also be totally separated from each other. So here I'll call useState again and extract my entered amount and my set entered amount function with array destructuring. And now we got these two pieces of state which belong to this component. And we can update and read them individually so they work in a totally separated way. When I update the amount, this will not affect the title and vice versa. So for the amount change handler, we can call setEnteredAmount and pass in event target value here as well. Well, and unsurprisingly, we can do the same for the date. Call useState again and store an empty string here as well. By the way, I'm storing strings all the time and not a number here for the amount, for example, because by default, whenever you listen to the change event for an input, if you read the value of that input element, it'll always be a string. Even if it stores a number, it will be a number as a string. And the same for the date. So we always get a string here. That's why I also initialize all states with a string. And here, therefore, for this third state, I have my entered date and set entered date. And I now also can update this state here with set entered date event target value like this. Okay. Now we got these three state slices, and this is really important. This is absolutely okay, and you will see that quite a lot, that you have more than one state per component. You can have these separate states and update them separately and manage them separately. That is a key part of this entire state concept React ships with. You can and you often will have multiple states per component. Nonetheless, this multiple states versus one state thing is a concept I want to take a closer look at.